What if I told you that beneath the roar of missiles, the silent whispers of ancient prophecy, and the blinding flash of breaking news lies a truth far more haunting than any headline? That the conflict between Iran and Israel isn't just about politics or religion, but about power, legacy, and a dangerous dance at the edge of war. This isn't just another video. This is a journey into one of the most explosive rivalries shaping our world today. A rivalry so complex, so deeply rooted, that it has the power to trigger a storm reaching every corner of the globe. From secret nuclear ambitions to shadow wars fought in the dark, from alliances built on fear to betrayals written in silence. This is the untold story, raw, real, and dangerously relevant. So take a deep breath and lock in, because by the time we're done, you won't just understand the Iran-Israel conflict. You'll feel the tension, the stakes, and the chilling truth of how close we are to something the world isn't ready for. Keep watching. The silence between the bombs has a story to tell. The relationship between Iran and Israel has undergone a dramatic transformation over the past century, rooted deeply in political shifts, revolutions, and ideological awakenings. Before the Iranian Revolution of 1979, Iran and Israel shared a relatively strong and strategic alliance. Under the rule of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, Iran was a pro-Western monarchy and one of the few Muslim-majority nations that recognized Israel de facto. Both nations collaborated in intelligence sharing, oil trade, military cooperation, and economic ties. Iran supplied oil to Israel, and Israel helped Iran develop infrastructure and defense capabilities. This period marked a pragmatic relationship, driven not by shared ideology, but by mutual regional interests, particularly in countering Arab nationalism and Soviet influence during the Cold War. However, this geopolitical balance shifted dramatically when the Islamic Revolution overthrew the Shah and brought Ayatollah Khomeini to power. The newly established Islamic Republic of Iran was built on a foundation of anti-Zionism and opposition to Western imperialism, which it closely associated with Israeli policies in the region. Khomeini severed all ties with Israel, labeling it as an illegitimate and occupying force. This wasn't just a diplomatic move. It was an ideological stance rooted in the regime's revolutionary identity. Iran began to position itself as the leader of resistance against Israel, supporting groups and movements that shared this vision, particularly the Palestinian cause. From that moment on, Iran's foreign policy treated Israel not as a state to negotiate with, but as a symbol of oppression and injustice that must be confronted. The Iranian leadership saw Israel as a threat not only to regional stability, but also to the Islamic world's unity and moral authority. Meanwhile, Israel viewed the new Iranian regime with increasing alarm, particularly as Tehran's rhetoric became more aggressive and its regional influence began to grow. This foundational shift from diplomatic engagement to ideological hostility laid the groundwork for over 4 decades of indirect conflict, covert operations, and proxy confrontations. The enmity was no longer about political disagreement. It became about identity, legitimacy, and survival. While the geopolitical chessboard around them changed with time, the core animosity, rooted in 1979, has remained a constant driving force behind Iran-US relations, shaping both nations' strategic behavior and alliances in the modern Middle East. At the heart of the Iran regime conflict lies a deep religious and ideological divide that transcends borders and diplomatic norms. The Islamic Republic of Iran, established after the 1979 revolution, adopted a political theology rooted in Shia Islam and framed its foreign policy around resistance to what it perceives as oppression and imperialism. Central to this worldview is the rejection of the State of Israel, which Iranian leaders consistently refer to as the Zionist regime. Iran does not recognize Israel as a legitimate nation and instead views its existence as an occupation of Palestinian land and a manifestation of Western colonialism in the heart of the Muslim world. This ideological stance is more than rhetoric. It is built into the foundational principles of the Iranian regime. The Supreme Leader and the Revolutionary Guard often refer to Israel in eschatological terms, portraying it as a temporary force destined to be dismantled. The annual observance of Quds Day in Iran, established by Ayatollah Khomeini, is a state-sanctioned event dedicated to expressing solidarity with Palestinians and denouncing Israel's policy. This framing has created a national narrative in which opposition to Israel is seen as a moral and religious duty. On the other side, Israel views Iran not just as a geopolitical rival, but as a state actor that poses a direct existential threat. Iran's support for militant groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, and various Shia militias across the Middle East is interpreted by Israeli leadership as a deliberate strategy to encircle and weaken the Jewish state. Israeli officials frequently point to Iran's calls for the destruction of Israel as evidence that the threat is not just theoretical, but deeply embedded in Iran's strategic objectives. Israel's security doctrine is shaped by the belief that it must remain militarily superior to deter any threats in a hostile region. The ideological enmity from Iran challenges this doctrine, as it is not based on territorial disputes or political disagreements that could be resolved through negotiation. Instead, it is rooted in identity, faith, and a vision for the future of the Middle East that cannot easily accommodate coexistence. This fundamental ideological clash between a state that sees itself as resisting injustice and one that sees itself fighting for survival continues to fuel mistrust, proxy conflicts, and a dangerous cycle of escalation that defines the modern geopolitical landscape in the region. One of the defining features of the Iran-Israel conflict is the use of proxy warfare and indirect confrontation to exert influence across the Middle East. Iran, unable to directly confront Israel militarily due to distance, international pressure, and strategic limitations, has instead developed a vast network of allied non-state actors across the region. These include Hezbollah in Lebanon, various Shia militias in Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen, and Palestinian groups like Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Through funding, training, weapon supply, and ideological support, Iran has built what it calls the axis of resistance, aimed at countering both Western influence and Israeli presence in the region. These groups serve as extensions of Iranian power, allowing it to project force beyond its borders without engaging in direct warfare. Hezbollah, perhaps the most notable of these proxies, plays a crucial role in this strategy. Based in southern Lebanon, it has evolved from a resistance movement into a heavily armed and politically powerful organization. Hezbollah has fought multiple conflicts with Israel and is seen by Israeli defense planners as a direct and immediate threat on their northern border. Iran's support for Hezbollah includes advanced weapons, intelligence, and logistics, enabling the group to operate with increasing sophistication. This presence near Israel's border has created a constant state of alert and tension, making any miscalculation potentially explosive. In response, Israel has adopted a proactive and preemptive approach to curbing Iranian influence. This includes airstrikes on Iranian weapons convoys and military installations in Syria, cyber attacks on Iranian infrastructure, and targeted assassinations of Iranian nuclear scientists and military figures. Israel aims to prevent Iran from establishing a permanent military foothold in neighboring countries, particularly Syria, where the chaos of civil war has opened space for external actors to entrench themselves. This shadow war has turned several Middle Eastern nations into battlegrounds for the Iran-Russia rivalry. Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon have all become arenas of indirect conflict, where airstrikes, drone attacks, and covert operations replace traditional warfare. Civilians in these regions often bear the brunt of these hostilities, caught in a geopolitical struggle far beyond their control. The use of proxies allows both Iran and Israel to advance their strategic goals while avoiding all-out war, but it also creates a volatile and unstable regional environment where escalation is always one step away from catastrophe. The issue of Iran's nuclear program lies at the center of one of the most intense and dangerous dimensions of its relationship with Israel. Iran maintains that its nuclear activities are for peaceful, civilian purposes such as energy production and medical research. However, its past secrecy, uranium enrichment beyond agreed levels, and development of missile delivery systems have led many, especially Israel, to believe that Tehran seeks to develop nuclear weapons capability. For Israel, this is not just a strategic concern, it is an existential threat. The idea of a state that has consistently called for the end of the Israeli state possessing a nuclear weapon is unacceptable to Israeli leadership across the political spectrum. Over the past 2 decades, this nuclear tension has fueled an intense shadow conflict involving espionage, cyber warfare, sabotage, and diplomatic maneuvering. Israel has been widely reported to be behind numerous covert operations aimed at slowing or disrupting Iran's nuclear progress. These included the Stuxnet cyber attack, which targeted Iranian centrifuges, and the assassinations of Iranian nuclear scientists. Israel's Mossad intelligence agency has also reportedly conducted operations to steal documents, monitor nuclear sites, and track key Iranian figures. These actions are aimed at delaying Iran's nuclear ambitions while buying time for international diplomatic efforts or preparing for more decisive measures if necessary. On the diplomatic front, the Iran nuclear deal, formerly known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, was a major turning point. Signed in 2015 between Iran and world powers, it placed significant restrictions on Iran's nuclear activities in exchange for sanctions relief. Israel, however, strongly opposed the deal, arguing that it did not go far enough to dismantle Iran's nuclear infrastructure and that it gave Iran a pathway to resume weapons development once the agreement expired. The U.S. withdrawal from the JCPOA in 2018, followed by the reimposition of sanctions on Iran, escalated tensions and pushed Iran to breach many of the deal's key limits. As Iran has resumed higher levels of uranium enrichment and reduced cooperation with international inspectors, fears in Israel have intensified. Israeli officials have repeatedly stated that they will not allow Iran to acquire nuclear weapons, hinting at the possibility of unilateral military action if diplomacy fails. The nuclear issue represents a dangerous flashpoint where ideology, national security, and global diplomacy intersect, and any misstep could trigger a regional war with devastating consequences far beyond the borders of either nation. The involvement of the United States is a defining factor in the geopolitical dynamics between Iran and Israel, acting as both a stabilizer and a source of heightened tension in the region. Israel enjoys a strong and strategic alliance with the United States, built on shared democratic values, military cooperation, and a long-standing commitment to Israel's security. This alliance has translated into billions of dollars in military aid, advanced defense systems like the Iron Dome, and unwavering diplomatic support in international forums. The U.S. has often shielded Israel from global criticism and has backed its right to defend itself against threats, particularly from Iran and its allied groups. In contrast, Iran's relationship with the United States has been defined by hostility since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, when the U.S. Embassy in Tehran was stormed and American diplomats were held hostage. That event marked the beginning of a 4-decade-long adversarial relationship, characterized by sanctions, military standoffs, and mutual suspicion. Iran perceives the U.S. as a global hegemon intent on undermining its sovereignty, destabilizing its government, and supporting regimes and policies that are hostile to the Islamic world. American military presence in the Persian Gulf, its invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan, and its backing of Israel have all reinforced Iran's view of the U.S. as its primary adversary. This triangular relationship fuels the confrontation between Iran and Israel. Every U.S. action in the Middle East scrutinized by Iran through the lens of this rivalry, and any Israeli move against Iran is often seen as being either supported or coordinated by Washington. When the U.S. pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal in 2018 under the Trump administration, tensions escalated rapidly. Iran resumed its nuclear activities, and the threat of conflict surged. Conversely, attempts at diplomatic re-engagement with Iran, such as under the Obama administration, were met with criticism and concern from Israeli leaders, who feared that diplomacy would only embolden Iran. The U.S. role extends beyond just policy. It shapes military balance, economic sanctions, and diplomatic efforts. American sanctions have crippled Iran's economy, while U.S. weapons and intelligence significantly enhance Israel's ability to counter Iranian threats. This imbalance in relationships contributes to the volatility of the region. Both Iran and Israel understand that American support can tip the scales in either direction, making Washington's choices a central force in either containing conflict or pushing it closer to open confrontation. The risk of open conflict between Iran and Israel remains one of the most pressing and volatile challenges in the Middle East, with implications that could destabilize the entire region. While both nations have so far avoided direct large-scale warfare, the pattern of escalating tensions, covert operations, and increasingly aggressive rhetoric suggests that the line separating shadow conflict from open war is thin and fragile. A single miscalculation, an airstrike gone too far, an assassination that provokes retaliation, or a cyber attack with unintended consequences could set off a chain reaction that neither side can fully control. The interconnected nature of regional alliances and hostilities means that a direct confrontation between Iran and Israel would not remain contained, but could quickly draw in other actors, including Hezbollah, Hamas, the United States, and Gulf Arab states. In recent years, the region has seen a dramatic increase in military activity tied to this rivalry. Israel has conducted hundreds of airstrikes in Syria, targeting Iranian weapons transfers and military positions. Iran, in turn, has expanded its drone and missile capabilities, and its proxies have launched attacks on Israeli territory from Lebanon and Gaza. Both sides have invested heavily in intelligence and counterintelligence, and their operations often occur without warning, leading to a state of near constant alert. Civilian populations live under the looming fear that war could break out with little notice, disrupting lives and risking widespread casualties. The danger is amplified by the complexity of the modern battlefield. Cyber warfare, drone strikes, and proxy attacks allow both sides to test each other's red lines without full engagement, but they also increase the risk of accidental escalation. Each operation carries the potential to spark a wider conflict, especially if civilian lives are lost or critical infrastructure is damaged. The assassination of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani by the United States and Iran's subsequent retaliation demonstrated how quickly localized actions can spiral into international crises. Diplomatic channels remain fragile and limited. While some back-channel communications may exist, there is little trust between Tehran and Tel Aviv, and formal diplomatic relations are non-existent. International actors like the United States, Russia, and the European Union often attempt to mediate, but deep-rooted ideological hostilities make sustainable agreements difficult to reach. As both Iran and Israel continue to expand their military capabilities and entrench their regional positions, the threat of a sudden escalation remains a constant and dangerous reality that overshadows the entire Middle East landscape. In the shadows of ancient empires and modern borders, the story of Iran and Israel is not just a regional dispute. It is a complex, deeply rooted conflict shaped by ideology, history, power, and survival. What began as a political shift in 1979 has since grown into a multi-layered confrontation, played out through proxy wars, nuclear standoffs, cyber operations, and competing worldviews. It is a rivalry that reverberates far beyond the Middle East, influencing global diplomacy, military strategies, and the balance of power. Yet beneath the surface of hostility lies a deeper lesson: that unresolved history, fueled by fear and mistrust, can ignite fires that consume generations. As the world watches, the choices made by these two nations, and by those who influence them, will determine not only their own futures, but the stability of an entire region. The path ahead is narrow, fragile, and fraught with danger. But understanding the truth behind the headlines is the first step toward wisdom and perhaps, in time, a more peaceful tomorrow. Thank you for taking the time to explore one of the most critical geopolitical stories of our era. In a world full of noise and confusion, your curiosity is a light. May you continue seeking truth, asking bold questions, and never settling for shallow answers. Good luck on your journey through knowledge and understanding, because informed minds shape a better world. Stay curious, stay wise, and thank you for listening.